Hello and welcome to another episode of Hope, hearing other people's experiences. And today I am so happy and grateful to have the amazing, clever, much cleverer than me, Dr. Gillian Shorter, who is a PhD in psychology from Belfast Queen's University. Did I say all that right? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Great. So thank you so much for coming on. And do you want to tell us a bit about you?
So, Georgie, it's a joy to be here on your podcast and to talk to you today. And it's really exciting to be part of Hope. And it's great to see what other people have been saying. I used to be a raver. So my first ever research project was asking people in nightclubs what substances they were on and maybe what they were thinking about taking in the future, because I loved being out. I loved the dancing. I loved the community. And I just wanted to keep people safe and well. We were all like early 20s, or late teens. And, some of us were on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds. And sometimes there was alcohol, sometimes other drug use. And we were all just trying to make sense of life. And, sometimes that works well, as you know, and other times it's a little bit trickier. So it kind of comes from that point. Friends, family struggle with alcohol, other drugs. Sometimes they went for help, but it wasn't helpful. And I wanted to try and do research here at Queen's University Belfast that might help improve things for people.
I love that.
And yeah, if I could come in one last thing, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I love this. You carry on. I've talked too much.
The thing I love most about the Hope podcast is that people are telling their personal stories. And I sometimes find that, as a researcher, you don't always talk about your own experiences. And I'm really humbled by everyone sharing their experience on your podcast. So for me, particularly, I've had an up and down relationship with alcohol. After my dad died, I found myself drinking an awful lot because, kind of the grief was big. It was this big unbearable thing. And alcohol was a great solution at the time. It's a great solution for a lot of really temporary, tiny little problems. But after a while, it just becomes very difficult. So I come at this from different directions. As a researcher, as a human myself, I think with a few flaws, as someone a bit curious about how we operate and how drugs and alcohol fit in with that.
So you kept people at raves safe and well, or that was the aim, right? And I think that's wonderful, because I used to put God knows what into my system, didn't really have a thought about the consequences, and there were some really hairy times. And I think if I would have had somebody like an angel like you looking out for me, maybe I would have ended up, at home and not where I ended up. But I love the work that you do. And that brings me neatly onto my next question, which is that, say somebody is already abstinent, right? They, like myself, let's use me. So I've been abstinent since 2020, and I couldn't go back, thank you, yes, ego. I couldn't go back to the way that I used to drink, or any drink, because I know that it sparks something off in my head. So harm reduction and enabling. I know that enabling is a kind of yucky word, but I couldn't go back to drinking now. Do you think that there's ever a way back?
So it's always a big dilemma. If you've identified that you have an alcohol problem, then what do you do next? The good thing kind of with abstinence is it's so much easier. There's just one decision, drink or not. If you want to moderate if you've got alcohol problems and you want to moderate, it's a little bit more difficult. So let's say you're drinking like every day. So what are you going to do then? Are you going to change the amount? Are you going to have an alcohol-free day? How does that fit in? So there's so many decisions you can make and that might not work for you. So in some ways, I think it's great when you make that call for abstinence. And I know we've talked before about how positive this has been in your life and how great it is for many, many people to be alcohol-free. And I think it's really about sort of examining that role of alcohol in your life. And do you even need it at all?
Now
So
I
I think,
realized that I don't need it at all anymore, but it took a very long time. Long.
well, this is it. If you think about society and you think about films, we kind of have two people. We kind of have they can drink as much as they want and everything's fine. Maybe they'll get a little bit of a bar fight because we're watching a film and that's what happens. Or, has problems with alcohol and can't drink. And there's no wiggle room or any of the weird stuff in between that is what real life looks like. And I think, we don't need alcohol to survive. We don't, it plays a role for some people. Some people drink, little bits and it's fine. Some people drink little bits and there's big problems. And all of this is valid. We're all just trying to make sense of this world that we're in. And I think it's good to kind of really examine what alcohol does for you. And if it doesn't do anything, then get it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I were to basically, I know that I can't moderate. I've tried every single method of moderation that I can possibly try, and it's led me to one drop is too much because off I go. I think there's a point where people just are too far gone to reintroduce it into their lives. What do you think about, like, that's impossible, isn't it?
You know, Alcohol is a poison. The more we
Yeah.
drink, the more risk we have. And I think as a society, we could all do with drinking less, including me, including everyone. And it's just not adding anything to your life. It just isn't. And it doesn't make you a flawed person. And it doesn't, but you've just decided that your life is worth living in a sober context,
Yeah.
and all the things that you hold dear and that give you purpose and pleasure don't need this toxin to be around. And
Yeah.
for some people, they can drink and it's adding great things to their life, and that's fine. But for you, to me, I think, judging yourself for not drinking is not a good idea because you're making the best choices for you to live your best life. And you're
Yeah.
doing great. So it's so nice to hear, when you've been talking about what sobriety means to you, just what it's giving you and not what it's taking away. And maybe if you did have a drop, you would then want to have more. Alcohol is moreish. It's kind of
Oh, yeah.
part of what happens in our physiological bodies when we have it. So it's not a flaw in you necessarily. It's just kind of the nature of the substance, but it's doing nothing for you. So why would you want it?
So when you said, like, it's not adding anything to my life, it really wasn't. It was making my life very, very tiny because
Yeah.
I was started out because it was fun, right? It was fun for a time. But then it slowly became completely unfun and necessary. And so what is it adding to my life at that point? Nothing at all. So that is a really good point there. And you actually remind me of this guest we had on recently, who is also following alcohol free. So she's not thinking about taking stuff away. She's thinking about what all she gains from not drinking. And I think it's a really beautiful concept. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Also, harm reduction. So harm reduction, I did a bit of research. I do that every now and then. And the centers in America where you can get a clean needle, or I don't know too much about it, but I heard that you were interested or involved with one of those.
Yeah, so most of my work is on that foundation of harm reduction. So this is just about meeting people wherever they're at and without judgment and trying just to get those negative consequences down. So back in the clubbing example, for people who are on amphetamines, MDMA, things like that, often get quite thirsty.
Yeah.
But you don't really have the same cues to turn off the thirst. So one of the ways we can help people is to remind them that you will be thirsty, but to be careful not to drink too much, because you'll throw off your electrolyte balance, and that could be fatal down the line, depending on how much you drink. So I don't want to tell people what to do. I do think we could all do with reducing our alcohol at a universal level across populations.
Yeah.
but I don't, if you're not in that position where you want to, I'll support you anyway. And that to me is where harm reduction comes in. It's like, what are you doing and how can we reduce some of the risks that you have? So if you are maybe drinking too much and you feel like alcohol is taking away from your life, but the idea of sobriety terrifies you, then how could we get you to cut down just that little bit so you feel like you're gaining some control and you're getting your feet back on track? And maybe you can do a little bit more reduction to get yourself in a position where you have the clarity, you're able to live that life you want to live for yourself. You feel like your life is full of meaning and purpose and relationships that mean something to you. And so it's really just about where are you at, let's be honest, and how can we reduce your risk? And then there's also ones in relation to drugs as well. So we do some other work in drug consumption rooms. So this is where we have places where people can take drugs under supervision, so that if they have an overdose, that somebody can intervene. And they also have lots of other treatments like needle exchange, which you've just mentioned, which is great for reducing bloodborne viruses, reducing injuries from injecting, and keeping people safe and well, and keeping people engaged with others and services. It's a really positive place that's usually full of love and support, and where people, if they're feeling like they're ready for that next step of treatment, whatever it looks like, that somebody will funnel them into that. Many of these people perhaps have experienced a lot of stigma, and I know you've talked a little bit about stigma on your podcast as well, of consuming drugs, of consuming alcohol, of consuming too much of something, and so quite often a lot of people are quite fearful of services, and what's going to happen if they're brave enough to go and ask for that help and support.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask actually, is like, a lot of people are very negative and stigmatize people that go to these places who they're like, oh, well, you're enabling their drug use. But what's really interesting is that you won't have to march your kids past them on the street while they're doing it there. And I think that the coldest of cynics could see how this would be a good idea. And have you had any positive response? Have you converted a cynic lately?
Always trying to convert a cynic, but always listening to people's perspectives as well. You know, a lot of these things people don't know about. There's a lot of fear around these and other harm reduction services. And I think the most important thing is that we listen to people, what their fears are, and try and understand or do something about it. If it is something that's genuinely a real concern. I think these are great places. We have evidence from all around the world. We did the world's largest report on this, where it demonstrates that they can save money, save lives, improve people's health. And crucially for a lot of people, because most people, you know, might not be taking drugs, they also make communities safer and healthier. And this can only be a good thing in my view. And going back to the alcohol example, there are similar kind of centers for alcohol, and trying to sort of help and support people, bring people in from the cold, help them get the services that they need, and trying to reduce the stigma at a kind of a population level, because no one really wakes up going, I'd really like an alcohol problem today. It kind of just creeps up on you.
Yeah, so that was really beautifully put, because it's a medical detox, I think. I've been in a medical detox before, and I told you about this time I woke up in the hospital, and I was, you know, the nurses, they are so overworked that they don't want a dirty alcoholic cluttering up their ward. And so what would have been good would have been to just be checked onto the detox unit, because then I would have at least had like a few days for it to leave my system safely, because alcohol withdrawal can kill you. And that's one thing that I really want to tell people, because, you know, they can't, if they're a daily drinker like that, they can't just stop, because you can have a seizure. It's really, not many people know that. And so medical detox is essential. Have you had any experience of dealing with people who have been to a medical detox?
So I'm not actually a practicing psychologist, just to be clear,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I have heard of some people going to services, whether it's medical detox or the emergency room, and having very similar experiences to what you have talked about. And I think when you have a lot of those experiences over time, you use some terms there, and I kind of flinched a little bit. I was like, "Ooh," you said some terms that I was like, I don't even want to say them again. I
What,
hope you'll
dirty
forgive me
alcoholic?
because to me, I see you as someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol, but you're a person first. And that's not to take away from how difficult it is for people in emergency rooms and you know, I am sympathetic. They're overworked. They haven't really got time to think, where this person's psychology coming from or whatever. But at the same time, it does a lot of damage to have to be treated in those kind of ways, and it sometimes stops people getting help. But there are so many places to get help, and I think that's the thing, I would like to kind of stress. There's everything from online support. You already mentioned about sober communities and how useful
Uh-huh.
they are for people. Alcoholics Anonymous. We've got going to your GP. There's some good medications you can get as
Mm-hmm.
well, even some for moderation, as well as abstinence. There's lots of charities, there's specialist addiction services, but I also love that you talk about that crucial point. If you've been drinking daily for 3, 4 weeks and you feel like you've got a physical dependence, or maybe you stop drinking for a day and you find yourself shaking a little bit, or your hands are just a little bit shaky, or you're feeling a real physical like experience when you haven't been drinking, I think it's really, really important that you seek medical support. Not me, not a psychologist, not a
Yeah,
practicing psychologist, but get medical support to do a detox
yeah,
because it's really, really, it can be fatal. And we want to keep people healthy, alive, and well. You're right, so few people know that.
yeah.
It's always quite surprising to me.
Well, I mean, like, I've heard a lot of stories from other people like me who are alcoholics or addicts, and this girl got locked in her room to detox by her parents, and she died in there.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
from severe withdrawal. And so, just the basic first aid, ideally, it would be a medical detox because they would give you medication, not alcohol, to taper off with. Because when you've decided to give up, the worst thing is to be told, like, you need to keep drinking so you don't die. It's like oppositional thoughts, the devil and the angel, they're really here now, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really think, what would you say to a parent who, or a loved one of somebody who is struggling right now and you're getting a bit fed up with them?
Look, it's really hard when you care about someone and their drinking's a little bit out of control. You can detox at home to a certain degree. You shouldn't stop completely. One of the ways you can do it is a gradual decrease, and I mean gradual. So the first thing to do is really count your drinks. What are you drinking? And then you want to make very small incremental changes on the way down. But this takes an awful lot of effort and support to do that. And you ideally, so perhaps if you're drinking spirits, you would want to then reduce down to lower strength alcohol as well over time. So then you're kind of reducing the alcoholic load on your body, both in a neurological way for your liver, for uh, your kidneys, and everything else. So just taking your time, you can do it.
Yeah.
It would be advisable to let your GP know that this is the strategy that you're taking, so they might be able to provide you with medication and support. Um, because I know there is a waiting list for detoxes
Oh
and
God,
different things
yeah.
like that. And there are private detoxes as well, but you might not have the money for that. So it is possible to decrease right down to zero, but it takes a lot of time to do that. And again, really recommend having a conversation with your GP about it, so that you feel supported through that journey. Um, Dealing with other people's drinking, I think for me, when you go to therapy for anything else other than alcohol, maybe you're struggling with a bereavement or something, and you go and talk to a therapist, the therapist always says to you, you can only change yourself and your reaction to people, that you can't change others and so on. And the same is true for alcohol. The onus on change is them. And the first thing I always say to people who are suffering with someone they care about is to try and look inward and make sure you're looking after your own personal well-being as the person who cares about the well-being of the person maybe who's drinking a little bit too much or
Yeah.
experiencing those problems. That's got to be your first and only priority.
Well, that's the old
I also think
oxygen
you don't need
mask.
to reach rock bottom. It's a common term. I also think maybe it's sometimes misused, and instead of it being like they've got to be homeless and not able to afford to eat and all those kind of really difficult things that you don't really want anyone you love to experience. I think it's more about people need to find a reason to change.
Yeah.
So by this, I kind of mean, for me, I don't do an awful lot of work in recovery necessarily, but for me, I think recovery is really about behavior change. This is all about increased personal, social function, better quality of life, and better well-being, kind of finding your purpose, kind of helping to develop a life worth living. And I think it's really about people identifying people who are experiencing those problems that you love, finding and maybe sort of thinking about what role alcohol plays and what kind of changes they might want to bring in for the life they want to live for themselves. Maybe it's reconnecting with kids, or they always dreamt of a trip to, I don't know, Australia or somewhere lovely like that. And it's just helping them kind of move towards goals that are really positive for them.
I like the sound of that.
I also think it's really important to try and not have those conversations when people are really intoxicated about what they want. Trying to give them a bit of space and create some space for yourself. I know depending on the size of place that you live, it's not always possible. Maybe sometimes go outside, go for a walk if you need to. And really set boundaries that are really about you and what you're doing instead of setting boundaries that require somebody else to do something. Um, it's really difficult. And it is very, very common actually to have someone in your life. In fact, I would say nearly everyone has someone in their life that's experiencing problems with alcohol or drugs. It's quite common.
So when is tough love appropriate?
I'm not an enormous fan of tough love,
Yeah.
personally, because I'm much more thinking about how you can communicate positively with them about how you feel, what you need, ask them what they need. Ideally, when they're maybe less intoxicated or sober, depending on what the situation is with the person. And another thing I think could be quite helpful is, trying to think about, you can do certain things like not have alcohol in the house or not buy alcohol for people, or um, you can do lots of different things, like maybe not drink in front of them or with them,
Oh God, no.
to try and keep yourself healthy and well. And I think I would prefer that you create boundaries that keep you safe and well rather than tough love. Um, and I think these things are quite difficult to work out. So, it'll differ depending on the circumstances. And sometimes it's really great for you to get help for you to
Yeah.
deal with this situation, separate from whether they decide to change or not, because you're not really in control of that. And if
No.
you hang all your hopes on their change and your well-being absolutely
Oh,
rests on their change, if they don't change, then you end up stuck in this position where you're not doing well either.
yeah.
So don't be afraid to get help for yourself independently of the other person, if you think that would be helpful. Or they might go to couples therapy or family therapy with you and you all work it through together as a family. That's also a possibility.
Okay, great. So there's plenty of resources out there. They just have to look for them. And what I will add is, the tapering off thing, I think somebody has to be there with you guarding the booze, because I would say I'm tapering off. No, I wasn't. I was like, oh, I'm sure I am. I had one less than yesterday, but really I was probably drinking more because somebody told me that I couldn't.
Yeah.
So it's good
Do
to
you
have a
know,
nanny.
Georgie, you need to be kind with yourself whenever you think about some of those stories as well, because, let's say on a day that you were able to reduce down by one drink, that's a victory.
I don't know
Any
if I
less
did.
alcohol you can put in your body is reducing your risk.
Yeah,
So you're doing a great thing. Now, the difficulty then is maybe you're not counting properly and it's not working. But the other part of that is there's a million ways you can moderate. You can do alcohol-free days. You can do less alcohol on a certain day. You could pick a Tuesday. You could
I
pick,
tried
I'm
it.
only going to do 2 days a week, or I'm going to do 3 days a week. Or you could say, I'm not going to drink when the kids are around. Or there's so many different things. And sometimes it's hard to know which one's going to work for you. And sometimes none of the moderation options work for you. And
Yeah.
you've been talking about that as well. And that's not to be seen as a failure. That's to be seen as, well, now I know. And
Surrender.
I'm going to
That's
make
it.
different choices.
One choice, one decision, like you were saying before. Abstinence is
Yeah.
the easier of the two because like there's not really much thought that has to go into it. It's just like that's off the table, done. It's hard at first, but now it's like I don't feel any way about alcohol. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's just there.
Yeah.
So yeah. And I
And
did have
that's the
another
tricky
question.
part, Georgie, because it really is there. It really is everywhere. So
Everywhere.
outside my office at Queen's University Belfast, there's an off license at either door, there's several pubs. It is everywhere. And it does talk to us through advertisements, the romantic side of things, but actually you can live a really happy life with or without it. And it's great that you're making the choice that allows you to live your best life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gillian. And is there anything else that you'd like to add?
So the last thing I just want to add is if anyone is listening to this and they're struggling with their alcohol use, it's okay and it's more common than you think. I've given you some ideas, counting your drinks, maybe trying to work out what you could cut and how you could make your levels decrease. You can try it, it might not work. You could try something else, it might not work. We've talked a little bit about self-help, GPs, different things that are going on. If you try something and it doesn't work, please don't take it into your soul that there's something wrong with you. Alcohol is a very moreish, addictive substance. It is everywhere. We're told all the time that drinking is okay and it's good and blah, blah, blah. So, just use it as information. That didn't work for me. There are other options out there. You try a
Yeah.
service provider, they're not right for you. Doesn't mean that all of them won't be right for you. You could try a different service provider. You could try self-help. You could try your GP. You could try a detox. So if you have decided that alcohol and you need to interrogate the relationship you have with alcohol, don't give up. Don't fall into that cycle where you start being mean to yourself and then you drink to cope with that stress and then you feel bad about that. So you drink about that too. And you think you're a terrible person and you just keep
Yeah.
going around this little circle and you never escape. And it's really mean and your inner voice is horrible and they won't shut up,
Yeah.
depending on your sobriety at the time or how intoxicated you are. Just go, this is information. This is not working for me. I'm going to try something else. And know that I believe in your ability to change, even if you don't believe in it yourself. Lots of people change all the time. Lots of people do it by themselves. Lots of people use GPs. Lots of people do different things. You've made the choice that this is not serving you. Find that life worth living for yourself, however you define it, and don't give up. I believe in you.
I love that. That was, and do you know what? I could tell that you really meant that. Like you really meant that. And because
I've lost a lot of people with alcohol
Yeah.
and other drugs.
Yeah.
Some people, it's just really difficult. And I feel, I'm sorry, I feel a little bit emotional.
Oh, it's okay.
It is difficult. But we're all just trying to make sense. Everyone's just trying to do the best they can. We're all just trying to make sense out of this mad thing called life.
It gets a bit confusing. Yeah.
It is very confusing a lot of the time.
I just
For all of
pretend
us.
that I know. Yeah, of course. But yeah, I've just been told that I have a little bit more time, so I just wanted to ask you this. Do you have any books that you've released, or where can we find more Dr. Gillian? Because I need more Dr. Gillian in my life.
That's so nice. I keep most of my work on my university web pages. We can link to those in the show notes. If people have ideas about things that they think I should be investigating, or key things, they're also welcome to get in touch. And if they've read any of my works and they find them interesting or have a comment, they're also welcome to get in touch with me. I like to write more about the harm reduction side of things. I'm not a treatment provider, and I don't do an awful lot of work in treatment, but I am quite interested in us all staying well and healthy at population level, maybe dropping our alcohol levels down, and trying to reduce our risk at an individual, societal, and population level. So I'm always happy to hear from folks and hear their thoughts.
You're very approachable and very pretty. I have a big face here, big pretty face. So it's been a pleasure listening to what your big pretty face has been saying. And
Thank you.
yes, Dr. Gillian, that's given me a lot to think about. And I'm going to message you after this and go, oh, but I forgot this. So that's what usually happens. But thank you so much. And I love how kind and supportive you've been. Like, you're encouraging me to be compassionate towards my old self. And that's not
the
really...
world will be mean to you. That's a given. The world's mean to me. The world's mean to you. Individuals, people, society, blah.
Sometimes they're good, though.
We have a duty to try and be nice to ourselves, because
True.
that's the only inner voice we can control. And we do awful things, and we all do them. We all make mistakes. We all say things. We hurt people, sometimes quite badly as well. And there's just, we have to kind of make reparations where we can, say we're sorry, do what we can to repair the bridge. And if it can't be repaired, we also have to forgive ourselves.
Yeah.
And just try and get through. Yeah.
Okay. Gillian, Dr. Gillian, thank you so much. And yeah, you've been a really great guest. Thank you for talking to me from Ireland. And
It's my pleasure. Maybe I'll get to come to the studio next time.
Oh,
Sorry,
I would
the times
love
didn't line
that.
up.
I would love that. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you guys as well for watching another episode of Hope. I hope you find this useful. Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Gillian. You're the best.